Yeah. So, if you have brain surgery, you don't need anesthesia for them to do a lot of things in your brain because you have no sense of pain in the brain. So your brain could be, your skull could be fully open and it could be poking your brain and you will not feel it. It will be like as if somebody's touching a table. Just as a... So to start, you have a reasoning that justifies a boundary. And so there's a kind of reasoning that justifies this: I am at the body, this is me, and that's not me. And you're saying, well, physics says this, but there's still some kind of justification because your body is also appearing as the world is appearing. And so if you identify with the body, then you will create and find some kind of separation. But you could say you are not your body. Your body is appearing inside of your experience, your awareness. But if your body is something that you call I, why isn't the rest of the world I? That's the question. Yeah, but I'm pointing out to one example of something that you could say is intimately you, and actually most neuroscientists would think where consciousness comes from is the brain. And the brain, you could touch the brain and not feel anything. So, but that's just like a very small little point to see how the reasoning that justifies some kind of separation has flaws. And so look at the tendency to justify. And the resistance, you're talking about two parts, one that wants to push to dissolve the boundaries, and one that's fighting to create the boundaries. Something like that, what you were describing. And so what I'm pointing to is there's nothing to dissolve. There's no boundaries really there. It's just believing that they're there. And so you can't fight a belief by pushing or forcing. You just have to see reality. So if you believe something is true and it's not, you can't try to have an inner debate, fighting yourself to convince yourself. You just have to see. As soon as you see what is true, that belief is gone. And so what I'm pointing to is all the different angles in which you can explore these beliefs. And it's really this sense of I am here and I have a boundary and the rest of the world is out there. And so you're saying, well, if you touch my body, I feel it. If I touch the table, I don't. I'm saying, well, if you touch your brain, you don't feel it. So your brain is like the table. So you're using the sense of touch as a way to define. But you can go even deeper and just look at the actual experience and not, because now you're trying to debate maps. So you create a map and you're trying to debate where that boundary is on a map. and justifying the rationale of the map, but I'm saying, know that that is a map. Can you see that it's a map? The whole process of creating a boundary is a map. And so that's the reality that you need to see. And so the meditation is to kind of walk you through a whole bunch of territories where you would naturally think there are lines and boundaries, where your toes are. But if you look at your current direct raw experience, you don't even know there's a foot there unless you're looking at it. You only know through memory, and through memory you can build a mental construct of a map, which is the image of a foot that then you can superimpose on the sensation. And you can do that with your eyes closed, eyes open. The mind is very, very powerful, very complex, and it's constantly projecting these maps onto all of our experience. And that doesn't have to stop. You can't function without that. The problem is to believe that is absolutely real, that reality is like that and it is separated. And all of that supports a primal sense of separation, that any kind of questioning of that is going to bring up resistance. And so you can't push against that with kind of force and try to break down a barrier of separation, because there is no such thing. It's just the belief that that is real. And so look at the belief. So, and experiment with things that are kind of, you can focus on, like your foot. It sounds like a silly experiment, but you can go so deep into that. And notice how even when you think you're just having the sensation of a foot, there's these very subtle layers of map. When you really go into the sensation, you will feel like you are disappearing into it. Because the sense of I and sensation is also a map. The sense of I am feeling my foot is something that's happening through a subtle layer of thinking. And so we start with something like a foot because it's far away from where we identify. It's going to bring up very little resistance. But as soon as you start moving to the chest and the head, that's where you're going to start to fight it. Because there's a part that's not wanting to let go.
Yeah.
And then you can also look at, why don't you want to let go? What is it? What's the gain? Because there's a lot of people in this process of working to wake up, and there's a hidden agenda.
What do you mean when you say the world is not absolutely real, when that is not absolutely real? You use those words.
I'm referring to the map. So you will be so accustomed to having this layer of thinking and dividing and identifying everything at every waking moment is going to be a projection of a map onto reality. And that is fine. That projection of mental and I describe it as mind and imagination. Because when you imagine a unicorn flying in the sky, it's as real as a sense of Julian walking to the bathroom. It's in that same level of reality. It's a level of imagination. One is more practical than the other. One map could be a better map to describe reality so that you can navigate, but they're both at the same level of reality in the sense that they are just imagination. It's just mind. But then we tend to separate that and say, oh, the unicorn is not real. Julian and the world is. But the real raw experience, there's no unicorn, there's no, all of that exists really in the world of imagination. And so sometimes that world of imagination has problems, and that needs to be addressed, right? But when somebody is somewhat functional and they're interested in this topic, then we can talk about, okay, this is imagination. And I call it imagination kind of purposefully, so that we don't think that it's separate from any kind of imagination. When you think about where you come from right now, all of what you can conceive is imagination. And you can refer to it as memory, so it's informed by memory. It's imagination that is informed by memory. When you think of where you're going, 100% imagination. You can predict and be accurate or more or less accurate about what you're going to do, what's going to happen, where you're going to go, what the reality is going to be, but it's 100% imagination. And some people need a lot of work and adjustment there, right? But it's still the world of thinking and imagination. And so what I'm pointing to is you will have a whole functioning of imagination that you will take for real. You will say, this is not imagination, this is real, this is how the world, the raw reality is, and then this is me thinking about it and having imagination about it. But there's a whole layer that is going to be assumed to be real. And one of them is that there's a me and there's a world. That's the deep one. But this is the work of self-inquiry. The more you look at what am I, who am I, where am I, this kind of question, you cannot answer it. Everything starts to break down because there's really nothing there other than in the world of thinking and imagination. And so what that can do, I'll get to you, Willie, in a second. Just finish the phrase. What that can do is that it's about seeing with discerning clarity what is imagination, what is mind, what's sensation. Like we know very, very easily what is sound and what is sight. We don't confuse that. What can happen is that we think that sound and sight are separate. There's a world of sound, there's a world of sight, and we can alternate our attention to one or the other, and we know they're kind of in parallel, but actually look for where sound ends and sight begins. It's kind of a really interesting one. And then there's the world of sensation, what you feel and you've mapped to come through the body. So touch, basically. There's sight, sound, touch, and then the world that we project, that we see and we touch as outside. But even a neuroscientist will tell you everything you're experiencing is built 100% by your mind. And so now we get into the complexities of two kinds of mind. One is the mind that's building the world through perception and sensation, and the other one that's thinking mind, that's mapping it. And so what I'm trying to point to is that one I call raw sensation and perception, and the other one is imagination. And notice those are two separate things. And notice how you overlay imagination on raw sensation and forget about raw sensation. And the imagination becomes the real reality. And raw sensation becomes secondary. And they're the other way around. Then there's more, right? Because raw sensation is also projected by awareness, but don't want to confuse things too much. Willie? You're muted. Let me unmute you. There you go. Yes, I can speak to that. So the separation we're talking about is this core sense of a me and another. And from that deep sense of what I am is limited, you can say that is the root of a lot of our struggles, actually all of it. No, it's separation from anything that you call not me. And so it might be a little bit of a stretch to kind of wrap your mind around it now. But there's going to be a sense of what you are, and a knowing and an understanding of what you are. And so if I ask you, who are you? You could describe. You can describe you're a woman, you could describe your life, your inner experience. And there's a sense of an I, and then there's what follows the I. Grammatically, I am, or I. And whatever follows that defines the I. And in that defining, we limit the I. And this limitation is the same thing as saying separation. Because if you say, I am human, it means I am not plant. I am woman, I am not man. Any kind of descriptor or image that is taking the place of I defines it as not everything else. And this is very well known psychologically. It's not any kind of spiritual voodoo. And it's very well known that babies don't have this. That functioning just does not exist in babies, in newborns, and it develops over time. And so what happens is that sense of infinite, open, spacious being starts to get contracted into an idea of I. And this is actually a beautiful, healthy process. But what happens is that we lose the ability to recognize ourselves as that infinite, open beingness. And in a sense, this is what spirituality discovered way before psychology was discovered. There was a discovery of this recognition as infinite being. And this is what all of the founders of religions discovered, Jesus, Buddha, etc. They spontaneously realized that. And then that's where they spoke from. And it's quite simple. And it has to do with, like Jesus said, when you see yourself as children, you will enter the kingdom. And he also said, when you have a hand in the place of the image of a hand, you will enter the kingdom. When the inner becomes the outer and the outer the inner. So it's pointing to, and I'm super paraphrasing to kind of keep it really simple, those parables point to this realization and understanding that the raw experience of reality, how a baby experiences, is very free. There's a peace there and a freedom there that in a sense gets forgotten. It doesn't get forgotten or lost really, it gets covered, but you cannot cover it either. And this is what I described with a veil. And the veil has to do with a belief that the reality that the mind starts to create in imagination, in these maps, is more real than the reality that is the raw experience. And so when I talk about separation, it's the same thing as identification, but it has to do with a very, very deep belief that what I am is limited in some way. So I am this, not that. And it has to do with a very core experience that every person that somewhat develops healthily will develop that sense of separation and limitation. It's ego development. And so there's that infinite sense of being contracts and identifies. And all successful spirituality, as Buddha said, what is true is what works. So if it's successful and it works, it'll help you kind of flip those two around. And that identification with a belief in something that is limited can stop. And what happens is the belief stops. And when that belief stops, there's a lot of things that happen. So it could be a wild process, because that belief is very powerful. It allows us to function and develop